Good evening, everyone. Well, it's been one of those weeks. I shouldn't say no more. Leave tomorrow for Cooperstown, New York for 8 days, so keep Caleb and I in your thoughts and prayers for a safe trip. What else did I want to say beforehand? Can't remember now, but I figured I should get my teaching things out of the way before I left for a long time. So here I am again. I kind of like the theme of these unsung heroes that we've been doing on Wednesday nights, and I also did Sunday just because. And with that, we're going to talk about Ehud. And I'm not going to tell you exactly who he is or what he did right this minute, but just know that the unsung hero tonight is Ehud. He's mentioned, though, I guess I will go right into it. He's mentioned in the book of Judges, in the 3rd chapter of Judges. He is going to be the second judge of that time frame, that era. Or another name, which he's actually called, is the deliverer, a deliverer at the time, but the second judge. But if you're like me, I kind of like to know a timeline. I kind of like to know when things happen and the order of events. It just helps me remember things better and logically places those in my mind. So if we remember Judges, obviously it comes right after Joshua, and Joshua took the Israelites across the Jordan, went into Canaan, and began the conquest of taking out all the cities that they were supposed to do and destroy them to inhabit the land and to start over from there as he was commanded to do. So we know they did, and we know that it took about 7 years to do so. And they did a good job, except they fell just short in a few different ways. They didn't quite always completely wipe out everybody. There was a few pockets of tribes, a few pockets of peoples that they left alone. And that is going to create their demise here, which we'll see here in a second. I had said that the conquest was 7 years. However, Joshua continues to live in the land and kind of lead the Israelites for, I got another 18 years, but then when I was looking up something else, they said another 10 years. So whether it really matters or not, know that Joshua was still in their leadership after the 7-year conquest for either another 10 to another 18 years before he passes. The year that he passed was 1390, which I thought it was 1380, but there's, again, it could be 1390. The conquest ended 1398. That was 7 years from its start of 1405 to 1398. Whether he died in 1390 or 1380 is where everything starts to take off here. What we see is after he passes, the Israelites begin their demise, so to speak. You see here that when you jump into the book of Judges, the 1st chapter of Judges is essentially an explanation of the tribes that fell short. They didn't complete the conquest, as I had just previously said, and they left, like I said, pockets of inhabitants alive, and it started the process of their cycle of sin. Now, and it goes on through all the different tribes that fell just shy and just short. When you get to chapter 2, it's kind of its own chapter in itself. It's kind of its own explanation of the whole book of Judges in itself. Kind of like a summary of everything condensed Because when I was reading and reviewing, I was like, why is these out of order, and why is this happening? And essentially, it's a summary of what basically has taken place and is going to take place going forward as we pick up in chapter 3. It is God getting mad at them as they start their fall away from him. As they fall away from their covenant and commitment to him, he's upset. They mourn and weep over him, God being upset. And then, as we learn in chapter 2, it's mentioned that once Joshua is gone, and all those of Joshua's age that were his elders, his followers, those who believed in the same way and followed in the same way that Joshua did, as they began to pass, is when it really, really falls apart. I will read one verse in chapter 2 before we get to Ehud. And this is an explanation of basically kind of what took place. Chapter 2 of Judges, verse 10, you don't have to turn there. It says, "And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers," meaning they passed. "And there arose another generation after them, who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he, the God, had done for Israel." So in one generation after Joshua and after the elders and those who knew Joshua well, one generation after their passing, we're seeing that the Israelites did not know God, or they did not remember or know the works of God, and they are already essentially lost. And this isn't the lesson of the evening, but it's no different than today. I mean, if you grow up in a family that you're never introduced to God, you don't know anything. You don't know the difference. You don't know better. You're just not part of your lifestyle. You live life, you don't know anything. Or if you grew up in a family that knew God, but then part of the family stopped attending, and then they have kids, and they pretty soon, within a short generation, people that knew God then does not know God, just by whether or not they're being exposed to it at the family level in the family union. That's a side note. Essentially, basically what we start to see here is that it becomes a cycle. It becomes the cycle that they fall away, they mourn and weep, and they're in despair. God answers their despair. They're given peace and harmony for a while, and then they fall away, and we'll see the cycling of this all the way through the book of Judges. But starting in chapter 3, the first judge that was raised up by God after their demise was Othniel. He was the first judge that God called forth. It's Caleb's younger brother, by the way. I was reminded of that when I reviewed this. Othniel basically delivers them. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel. When he went out to war, the Lord gave over Cushan-Rishathaim, the king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, so that he prevailed over him. That happened to be who was controlling the Israelites at that time. And then once he prevailed over that king, it is said that Israel had peace and rest for 40 years. So, after him, they had peace and rest for 40 years before they start to fall away. So we pick it up in our actual text, finally, of what we'll talk about tonight. Our text ranges from verse 12 to verse 30. And I'm basically just going to read a few, discuss it, read a few, discuss it, read a few, discuss it. It's a pretty quick read, and it's a pretty cool little story. And we'll get the message of who he was and what made him the unsung hero, chosen by God to be one of those people to make an influence on his peoples. So if you are open to Judges chapter 3, we're going to start with verse 12. Now the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And he gathered to himself the sons of Ammon and Amalek, and he went and defeated Israel, and they possessed the city of the palm trees. And the sons of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. But when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord raised up a deliverer for them, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, a left-handed man. And the sons of Israel sent left-handed man, and the sons of Israel sent tribute to him by him to Eglon, the king of Moab. So right off the bat, we see in verse 12, right off the bat, it is said again, we see the cycle starting, that the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. This did evil isn't just, oh, they messed up, they did something wrong. It's more in reference to a persistent, continuous, repetitive wrongdoing that they're doing, which is falling away from God, falling away from the commandments, falling away from the law. And by the way, I forgot to mention, in my first two review chapters, what they fell away to was worshiping idols, worshiping Baal, worshiping the Ashtaroth, all of which came to them or was exposed to them because they did not wipe away all the peoples. The peoples remained, and eventually through time, through intermarrying, giving their daughters, taking their daughters, and eventually through culture, they got exposed to these false gods, and they started to act on these false gods. So because of that, the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab. And it's because they did evil in his sight. So the Lord basically said, you fell away again, you're going to worship their gods. I'm going to raise up one of them to reign over you for a while, which Eglon's the king of Moab that he chooses. We read real quickly that he chooses Ammon and Amalek. They meet together, they come together to defeat Israel. They possess the city of the palms, which is believed to be Jericho. It has a little bit of a symbolic message in regards to that. That conquest of the city of the palms establishes a strategic base in the Israelite history, symbolizing Israel's loss of covenant blessings. And essentially it says that Israel will now serve this king of Moab for the next 18 years. But they cried out to the Lord, and God heard their cry, and he raised a deliverer. Now, this cry in the Hebrew isn't a cry in terms of repentance. It's not a cry of saying, we're sorry, we're going to turn of our old ways, we're going to repent of those ways, we're going to come back to you. This type of a cry is more just a moaning and a groaning and wailing based on their oppression, is the type of cry that's described here in the Hebrew in that verse. So despite it not being a cry of repentance and turning back, God still hears this, God still acts on this. God still provides the deliverer, which we read that is now Ehud, a Benjamite who's left-handed. And it also says in that last verse 15 that I stopped at was that the sons of Israel sent a tribute by Ehud to the king, Eglon. A tribute is essentially a gift of money, essentially for being oppressed. You're going to pay me. If you want us to leave you alone any less than we already are, then you're going to pay us for that. So, as I left off, Ehud's going to take this tribute to the king and deliver it. So let's pick up in verse 16 now. And Ehud made himself a sword, which had 2 edges, a cubit in length, and he bound it to his right thigh under his cloak. And he presented the tribute to Eglon, the king of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man, and it came about when he had finished presenting the tribute that he sent away the people who had carried the tribute. So let's stop there real quick. So Ehud takes the tribute to him. He drops it off. He presents it. Once it's presented, what's the king's name? I forgot his name. Lost my train of thought. Eglon. He sends them away. He takes the tribute. He sends them away. And they're all on their way back. Now let's pick it up in 19 again. But he himself turned back from the idols which were at Gilgal, and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he said, keep silence. And all who attended left him. And Ehud came to him while he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he rose from his seat. You can just picture this man who's extremely large rising from his seat. And Ehud stretched out his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. The handle also went in as far as the blade, and the fat closed over the blade. And he did not draw the sword out of his belly. He left it. And the refuse came out. Then Ehud went out of the vestibule, shut the doors of the roof chamber behind him, and locked them. When he had gone out, his servants came and looked. Well, we'll stop there. So essentially what's taken place here is after they dropped off the tribute, the king said, thank you, goodbye. They're walking back. Ehud sees idols at Gilgal, turns around, changes his mind, and turns around. Now, whether those idols made him think, that's no way. Or whether he had planned this all along, whether it was just part of the scheme, whether it was part of his plan. But he turns around at that point and comes back and says, I have a message for you. I have a secret message for you. At that point, if I'm reading it correctly, tell me if anyone reads this any differently, but the king says he sends everyone away now, allowing Ehud to come to him to deliver this message that's secret. Ehud is able to get close enough to get all the way into his chamber where it's cool. He's alone with him at this point. When he says, I have a message from God, as he's standing up, being a left-handed man, he takes the sword off of his right thigh and thrusts it into the king's belly all the way to the handle. As we read, the sword was two-sided. It was a cubit, which means it's about 18 inches long. It's more of like a sword dagger, which would be easy to conceal and hide on his right thigh. He leaves it in. Body folds over it. Stuff starts to come out, and so forth. Leaves, locks the door behind him, and evidently there's a way out where no one sees him, and there might have been another way out, though. And we'll pick that up going forward as to where he goes and what he does next. But comments, thoughts in regards to, and this is kind of the specialness of God choosing Ehud. This is kind of the unsung hero-ness of him, is the fact that he was left-handed and they were unsuspicious of a left. Well, they wouldn't have known that. But most people that were going to be a soldier, like most people that might do some type of attacking, most people that's going to do something with a sword or a dagger would be right-handed. And it would be on their left side. Right-handed would grab something off their left to use. Something on their right would be kind of awkward, especially if it got longer, like a bigger sword. So that would be awkward to pull out. So it's usually opposite the body. It could be that they check out or pat down anyone that's going to see the king. They could have made sure that nobody is going to do harm to the king. And if they were going to do so, they probably would have touched the left thigh to see if there's a dagger. Not assuming that it's going to be a left-handed man pulling it from his right thigh. Now, any comments? Any questions? Any thoughts on that?
Ouch.
Does that make sense to all of us? In regards to him being, the notes say ambidextrous, but whether he's left-handed or not, he used his left hand to do so kind of unconspicuously. So with that being said, that's what occurred. Now, he locks the door behind him and escapes. So let's pick up the story from there. Then Ehud went out of the vestibule, shut the doors of the roof chamber behind him, and locked them. When he had gone out, his servants came and looked, and behold, the doors of the roof chamber were locked. And they said, "He is only relieving himself in the cool room." And they waited until they became anxious, and behold, he did not open the doors of the roof chamber. Therefore they took the key and opened them, and behold, their master had fallen to the floor dead. Well, we'll stop there real quick. Essentially, they waited and they waited and they waited. Eventually, they got anxious. They found keys to unlock the door. They went in, eventually to find him dead on the ground. The notes I'm using talks a lot about this being almost comical, that this is almost humorous, that this happens, the way this went about. Now, I don't know if I want to go that far, but they're saying that the king was naive, the king was dull, the king was vain, and that Ehud was sharp and cunning and strategic, and that this was almost funny how this took place, and that it stunk. And could that be representation of them having domination and controlling us for a while, and now we're taking it back? I don't know, but that was what some of the commentary had said and was that I was reading about. Nonetheless, let's finish the story real quickly. Verse 26. Now Ehud escaped while they were delaying, and he passed by the idols and escaped to Sirah. And it came about when he had arrived that he blew the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. And the sons of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was in front of them. And he said to them, "Pursue them, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hands." For they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan opposite Moab, and did not allow anyone to cross. And they struck down at that time about 10,000 Moabites, all robust and valiant men, and no one escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hands of Israel, and the land was undisturbed for 80 years after this point. Ehud escapes to the hill country. He blows the trumpet, sounding the people. The people come out. He tells them, let's go. He's in front of them. Let's go down, let's pursue them. God has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hands. This is where we now see more of a godly involvement. We now see him as the deliverer and as a judge, coming from God's deliverance, coming from God's choosing. Prior to that, we just see a man who goes and kills the king. When he declares that the Lord has given the Moabites into your hands, that is reference to this is God's doing now, and that he is chosen of God, and so forth. What I found also interesting is that they had gone all the way down and they had seized the fords of the Jordan River opposite Moab. So, does anyone know what a ford is? I had to look it up. You understand the context, but I had to look it up. Does anyone know exactly what that would mean to control the fords of the Jordan?
Isn't it the entrance to the river?
It's a crossing. It's a low spot, a shallow spot. It is something that can be used to cross the river. So they were able to get in those spots to not allow that to occur. So no reinforcements could come in, and they couldn't escape. So with that control and God's help, obviously, they killed 10,000 men. Now, that the Hebrew, where it says valiant and robust, I believe it's a similar word to the word fat that was described to Eglon. This word, being fat or robust, means just the opposite. These were valiant guys, men, warriors that were taken out by the Israelites, and or you can say God and God's help. Any comments, any questions, any thoughts?
Kind of finalizing what should have been done according to God's will early on,
Yep.
but it's kind of a shocking story.
I'll read a couple little things here. Maybe. Essentially, once they were subdued, they had rest for the next 80 years. Essentially, Israel is being restored, having control, reflects God's covenant faithfulness despite Israel's unfaithfulness. So God still provides despite their unfaithfulness. It's also thought that the message that can be taken again is that, and I'll just read this little conclusion statement, that the story of Ehud challenges us to recognize God's sovereignty and grace in using flawed individuals to accomplish his purposes. While Ehud's deception and violence raise ethical questions, I don't know about that. I think God chose him. The narrative underscores the deliverance that comes from God, not human merit. As we reflect on Israel's cycle of sin and redemption, we are reminded to turn to God in our distress, trusting his Spirit to work through unexpected means for his glory. So always turn to God in our distress. You never know how God's going to answer prayer. You never know who he's going to use to help us or to help out a situation. Another, I don't know, tell me if this context works. Don't judge a book by its cover type of a thought. But I thought it was a cool story. I thought his plan and his craftiness and his cunningness worked. It obviously worked. So if there isn't any more thoughts or comments or questions, remember him as the second judge of the book of Judges, bringing them about 80 years of peace and harmony before the cycle starts again. That's my message that's the teaching of the Wednesday night. Thank you.